Have you ever really thought about what goes on inside a voting booth? It feels like such a simple choice, right? But behind that one little cross on a ballot paper, there's this whole complex web of history, identity, and influence. Today, we're going to try and unravel the British voter and figure out what really shapes the choices we all make.
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question every single election, isn't it? What really makes someone tick one box over another? Is it how much money you've got in the bank, how old you are, the newspaper you read over your morning coffee, or is it something else entirely? We're going to dig into it and see what we find. So, to understand where we are now, we've really got to go back in time. For most of the 20th century, British politics had this very clear, almost predictable rulebook. And rule number one was dead simple. It was all about class. If you think about post-war Britain, society was just structured differently. Your job, the way you spoke, the street you lived on, all of that gave a massive clue about how you were going to vote. Politics was basically a straightforward fight between the professional, middle classes, and the industrial working classes. And the numbers from the 1979 election, wow, they tell the story perfectly. A huge 59% of the middle classes backed the Conservatives. But on the other hand, Labour completely dominated the working class vote, with nearly half of all skilled and unskilled workers voting for them. The lines were drawn, and they were really, really clear.
But then, things started to change. The economy shifted, society started to look and feel different, and those old, rock-solid class loyalties began to crack. And then, eventually, they just crumbled. This was the start of a massive voter shift. Political scientists actually have a term for this: partisan de-alignment. I know it's a bit of a fancy phrase, but all it really means is that people stopped automatically voting the way their parents did, or the way their profession did. That lifelong bond between a voter and a single party just started to dissolve. And this whole shift created a brand new type of citizen. We moved from the loyal voter, the person who stuck with their party through thick and thin, to the modern rational voter. And this new voter, they're more like a consumer. They shop around, they look at a party's competence, especially on the economy, and their loyalty, well, it has to be earned at every single election. So what about this number, 418? Well, that was the colossal number of seats won by Tony Blair's New Labour in their 1997 landslide victory. And how did they do it? By smashing right through those old class barriers and appealing directly to that middle-class rational voter with promises of economic competence. It was the ultimate proof that the old rules were well and truly broken. So, okay, if class isn't the main dividing line anymore, what is? Well, as that old pillar got weaker, new political battlegrounds just popped up. Demographics, things like your age, your gender, and even your postcode, became the new frontiers of politics. Age became one of the most significant divides in modern politics. By 2010, the gap was already stark. Younger voters, concerned with things like tuition fees and job prospects, they were leaning heavily towards Labour. Meanwhile, older voters, who were maybe more likely to own their own home and think about pensions, tended to vote Conservative. It's a generational split that's only gotten wider over time. Now, gender, that's a bit more nuanced. Historically, women were actually more likely to vote Conservative than men. But by 2010, that gap had narrowed to almost nothing. While you still see small differences, the idea of a solid women's vote that one party can rely on is pretty much a thing of the past. And finally, there's geography. The UK has a really distinct regional divide. Broadly speaking, major cities tend to be Labour strongholds, while the more rural and suburban areas are the heartlands of Conservative support. Where you live now says a whole lot about how you might vote. But it's not all about demographics. In this new, fluid landscape, two factors have become incredibly powerful in swinging elections: the media that frames the whole debate and the leaders who front the campaigns. They are, for sure, the modern kingmakers. And this brings us to this concept of presidentialization. British elections are looking more and more like the ones over in America. Voters are increasingly focused on the individual right at the top. Is the leader strong, trustworthy? Are they, likable? Their personal image can absolutely make or break a campaign. And you just can't talk about influence without talking about the press. This is probably the most famous, or infamous, front page in British political history. After a shock Conservative win in 1992, the Sun newspaper famously declared, "It's the Sun what won it." I mean, it's just such a stark, bold claim about the power of the media. To understand that headline's power, Just think about the media landscape in 2010. The biggest selling newspapers, The Sun and the Daily Mail, both with circulations in the millions every single day, threw their weight behind the Conservatives. Now, it's impossible to prove exactly how many votes a newspaper changes, but their ability to set the daily agenda is absolutely undeniable. What about this number? 9.6 million. That is how many people tuned in to watch the first ever televised leaders' debate in the UK back in 2010. It was a massive moment that put the party leaders and their presidential qualities under an intense, direct spotlight like never ever before. So let's just quickly recap the voters' journey. We've gone from a simple world of rigid class loyalty through a period of de-alignment to a modern landscape where floating voters judge parties on competence, identify with new groups based on age or location, and are heavily influenced by the media and the party leaders. Which leaves us with a final, crucial question for today. With the rise of social media, filter bubbles, and 24-hour news, has the whole idea of a truly rational voter become a myth? Or, in this fragmented world, are we actually more empowered, more informed, and more in control of our political choices than at any other time in history? Something to think about.